which we're having weekly meetings, okay? I'm a volunteer. Who's getting paid here? I'm not, okay? So I come to all these meetings. I don't get paid, so I don't want to see this process derailed in court because we had hoped for a quick resolution. And we didn't heed calls of multiple people who came up right here and said, I think it's going too quickly. I don't think we have good data. And I'm going to remind you that includes a consultant. That includes some lawyers out here. That includes, I think, 100% of the TAG committee said that. And at least, I may be wrong here, but I think at least 2 of your board members have verbalized this as well. So what I really worry about in this process is, I don't know, there's some lawyers back here, I know, but if I have a public record, multiple people and multiple experts are saying we aren't giving this process enough time for quality data to be included, I'm thinking that's lawsuit gold, okay? And once again, as somebody who's put a lot of time into this personally, and also a ratepayer and a taxpayer, I don't want to see this happen because we didn't heed those calls. I also had a conversation this morning with maybe David, I'm not sure, that said these processes are processes. And sometimes, and I know for myself this has happened, and I'm a pretty smart person, but I might need to come to 3 to 7 meetings before I even get what you're talking about, or before I get interested, or before I tell my neighbor you need to come to these meetings. Okay, so the process is the process, and we can't put some sort of a timeline on it. Like, I think a football game goes all the whole time. They give them the whole time. We don't call it at halftime. If we do, those Falcon fans would be really happy this year. But, so we have a time, but then we've put on a timeline that's a little more restrictive, which is fine, but if it's not working out, it's not working out. And I think we need to think pretty deeply about what that's going to mean at the end of the day. What is that going to mean to the document that we all care about and that we all have spent some time with? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair West. Peter Goldenring, on behalf of the Las Posas Basin Water Rights Coalition. I think you all have a letter that I asked be distributed because I want to make sure it's part of the administrative record apropos of the comments I just heard. But I do want to take this opportunity to raise a couple of issues more specifically relative to that letter. And in the context, I might add, in part, of 2 things that I've heard. One is the Board of Supervisors struggling with economic viability in this county and the best way to manage it and how to move forward, as well as the repeated issues that you've heard around what's going on. The coalition members, some of the coalition members and myself had an opportunity to meet with Jeff and Glenn at length earlier this week. I want to thank them for the generosity of their time. They were very generous with their time as we talked through various of the issues. And so let me sort of be succinct and clear. The LPUG plan is just fundamentally flawed legally and factually. We have that confirmation not just from Water Rights Litigation Council, but from our experts whom we've discussed with your staff. And I'm speaking just of the Las Posas Basin. It is just not supportable, the LPUG plan. The second thing that came out at the meeting, and which I saw yesterday or the day before for the first time, was a statement by LPUG folks who are defined as the leaders or the people with whom staff is involved, stating publicly in their minutes that they have been told that staff has been directed to draft the Las Posas Basin plan based on the LPUG plan. and that's in the minutes of the LPUG meeting. I don't know if it's true or not true. I'm just telling you what were in the minutes, and I wasn't at the LPUG meeting this morning, but if you were there, Director Borchard, they were in the last set of minutes, that express statement, which is extraordinarily troubling to the coalition and a number of other folks with whom we're discussing the matter, because we think that is both improper and invites fundamental error by your body. The third thing I'd like to bring to your attention is this all started with LPUG being out ahead of everybody, and so let's talk about LPUG being the model. And Jeff and Glenn were kind enough to share with us the cheat sheet, for lack of a better word, of what's occurring in the Oxnard world. And the Oxnard Basin, I think we all can agree, is critically overdrafted. And it is a very nuanced plan, which has a lot of different elements. It recognizes that water rights are owned by landowners. It requires a basin replenishment fee as part of the project process, which is critical because a basin replenishment fee becomes, if it's properly implemented, a bondable event in terms of raising money, in terms of municipal or other governmental bonds to fund projects. And it acknowledges water rights, because it doesn't just ramp everybody down to the same number, which in the LPUG plan is an unsustainable number. It will be a desert. The staff in the meeting confirmed, and I asked them if it was okay for me to say this, because I otherwise wouldn't, because we asked them, do you have any data that the Las Posas Basin is in critical overdraft, that it is at the point under the statute that requires it to be attended to immediately? The answer was no, it is not. That may very well be a different answer for Oxnard, but that's what staff said. And it is also what the data says, although the data is quite limited in terms of what is actually occurring in the Las Posas Basin. So from our point of view, we would urge that you step back relative to the Las Posas Basin. If the Oxnard folks are solidifying around a proposal plan, I'm telling you from what I know about it, it is far more nuanced and may very well be the kind of framework that's acceptable to the coalition. I think it will eliminate the haves versus the have-nots, which is fundamentally in the LPUG plan. And I think at the end of the day, we actually are at the place where it is likely that the Oxnard plan, with all of its gnashing of teeth and frustration to get here, may in fact be the better way of looking at it. We were told by staff that they've been directed to come back to you on December 8th with a plan. And the only plan that they're going to come back to you with, at least based upon the minutes in LPUG, is an LPUG plan on December 8th. It's going to be an allocation plan only. It's not going to deal with basin replenishment fees. We do not believe for a second that this is a work in process. In my view and the view of the coalition is that if there's a allocation plan implemented, then the political fight will be whether or not there's a basin replenishment fee. It will take 10 years to do that battle, and by then the allocations already will have ramped down. You have people out of business. Undeniably, the property values are going to drop the instant that kind of plan happens, because when you sell property, the first question is, what are your water rights? Well, the answer is, here's a ramp down to a desert, and, well, there may be a basin replenishment fee. We don't know what it will be and when it will be, or even if it will be. And so from a economic perspective, it will kill property values in the Las Posas Basin. So we would urge that you have staff step back from any kind of ordinance draft around the LPUG Basin. It's not in critical overdraft. In fact, our expert says it's a 2022 under Sigma issue. But I get it that you guys want to move faster and more quickly than other folks, and the statute maybe, but it's got to be done right, or honest to God, it walks into crazy litigation and conflicts, and it's the wrong basin to be at the party because it's not in critical overdraft. I think you should focus on Oxnard, work through those issues, allow those to percolate into the Las Posas Basin world, and then hopefully come forward in a way where this isn't so conflicted. And I apologize for the length of time, and I thank you for being generous in that regard.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I just wanted to point out that I busted my hand up yesterday, and the specialist asked me to come and see him, and he wants me there at 1:45, so I'm going to be walking out. But I do want to follow up with one comment, and that is I had a conversation with staff a few days ago, and I expressed, and I just want, for the benefit of the board as we're talking about things, I do want to make sure that we have a sustainability fee ready to go the day after we adopt the plan. We can't do the sustainability fee until we have the plan. But it should not be one of those things of we do the allocations and then everybody fights for a long time over the sustainability fee. Those two really do need, we have almost unanimous agreement that we should have the sustainability fee. And I just want to make sure that we move promptly on that now that we've worked through some other things and get the agreement on that sustainability fee. So that's just an observation. I can't go any further than that because of the Brown Act, I'm sure, from our council. And if I get done with the specialist and get back here in time, great, but I know it's a short agenda. I probably will not see you, right? Hope everybody have a good day.
We're hoping we're done before you get
That's right. Okay.
Thank you. Steve Hickox, Port Hueneme Water Agency. I just wanted to bring up a little bit of information regarding the M&I group and the OPB group. We have been busy working on coming to a consensus on a split ratio between the ag and M&I folks. We made a proposal to this board of 58-42, and there was a subsequent response to a 60-40 split ratio. Those numbers are close. They're based on actual pumping data. And the M&I group is comfortable with those numbers for now. And we know that at the end of the day, the final number may be different, but it gives a target to shoot for or a range from which we're comfortable working in. And that at the end of the day, we hope that the plan is fair and equitable for both, for all users, so that not one side of the users are heavily penalized, and that we collectively and collaboratively come to consensus and work this issue out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Any other public comments?
Hello, I'm Esper Peterson, and I am a grower out in the Las Posas Valley. I also am speaking as a member of the Las Posas Basin Water Rights Coalition. It's my understanding by a rough count that we represent about 30%, more or less, of the landowners in the east and west Las Posas Basin. And I'm also a member of the Golden Ring team here, I guess. So I don't hear anything out in the out in the Oxnard Plain about lawyering up or litigation or suing or this or that. That all seems to be going on in our little valley there. Now I have a couple of wells, one in each basin there. I can tell you that since the drought, my water actually, and I'm in the pumping depression, and there's a million explanations why, but I have more water in my well in the pumping depression than I had when I drilled the well in 2009 before the drought happened. I've gone to, like this other lady here, I've gone to a lot of the meetings, enough to get qualified to be a voting member of the Las Posas LPUG group. I asked the county's expert what they had come out and said in the West Las Posas Basin that the water level was below sea level. It's just not true. And then she said, well, let me explain. I'm only checking the Fox Canyon aquifer. There's multiple aquifers out of there. And It's just not true. The water level is above, except in the pumping depression in the West Las Posas Basin below sea level, and it is way above sea level in the East Las Posas Basin. Our experts that we've gone out and hired, supposedly we hired the best and the brightest, say that the basin is not in overdraft. There are more innuendos and things flying around here. Callegas has been engineering out this whole thing, and they have this plan for that. They have their ASR well field. Well, guess what? ASR well field is a $100 million boondoggle that doesn't work. Just doesn't work. You can hope it would work, doesn't work, and supposedly the rumor is that they're going to take some of our water. They want to control the water over and above and beyond that. Brian Bondi, who I like, I took him for a ride in my helicopter, and we looked all over out there with a bunch of the other guys how the drainage systems work. He's in question now. Who's he working for? What's he doing? I know when I've gone to all those meetings, every time I want to change something, it's written in concrete, engraved in stone, and can't be changed. That's all I've ever heard. When the ramp down started at 2009 to 14, that's going to kill me. That's where I got started in here. Now all of a sudden, we're going to include 2015. Was that to shut Esper up or some of the guys up? Either the dam basin's overdrafted and there's not enough water, it is, but we've got different people saying different things. More argument out in that basin than I've ever heard. Any plan that LPUG comes up with and you guys approve, and I don't know all these letters, sustainability and all this stuff, it's got to be like Caesar's wife. It has to be above reproach. It seems like everybody has to get together and that they should agree on a plan. Let's either agree to agree or agree to disagree, but all of a sudden you guys are going to rush in and do this and they're going to rush in and file suit and stop you and all that. Craziness. I tell you, I asked Brian Bondi point blank, can I grow avocados on 1.2 acre feet of water? And he said no. Now, I know that. I did that for the record. I can't grow, so that means I'm going to have to buy water. We're talking 200 acre feet, not a lot. I got 1,000 acres out there, 200 acre feet. But at $1,400 an acre foot, it's $280,000 a year. And like old Everett McKinley Dirksen said, the good senator from Illinois, pretty soon you're talking real money. So that's what I'm looking at. Finally, another question.
The quote is $1 million here and $1 million there. And pretty soon you're talking real money.
I thought it was $1 billion, he said.
I think it was $1 million in those days. Today, it would be $1 billion.
I think it was too long ago to be $1 billion.
So you know old Everett, too. So I got to disclose I'm from Chicago. But, and Director Craven, I don't want to beat her up, but I have one well over in the off of Lewis Avenue, and they've given GMA, I understand, has given 5,000 acre feet to Camarillo, desalters and all this stuff going on up there. And there's 2,500 acre feet just north of my well up there. And if we're going to cut the ag guys, how come I don't hear anybody talk about building? Now, I went to a zoning hearing in Camarillo. I almost fell off the chair. There was, the whole room was full of people, and I thought, watch these developers get killed. They all got up and loved the development they just approved. Why are we building more houses? Why are we building more buildings if we're cutting ag? So let's figure this whole thing out and keep these guys back here from getting rich. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Any board comments? Robert?
None.
Charlotte, David? No? All right, we'll move on to the consent agenda. There's just the minutes. We need a motion to approve.
Move the approval.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, moving on then to the regular agenda, ownership of AMI equipment.
Chair West, board members, I'm Arnie Anselm, staff to the GMA. While we're waiting for that item to come up, I'll just give a quick background. We were here before your board on October 13th to discuss this issue. That was by recommendation of the Operations Committee. No decision was made, no guidance was given at that meeting. We brought it back to the Operations Committee, had a good discussion, and so I'm here today to bring back what they reported and some recommendations. And at the October 16th Operations Committee, the discussion was broader than just the ownership of the AMI under the grant. It was more the value of owning equipment to the GMA and what the benefit to the GMA would be. And it boiled down to ensuring confidence in the reported extractions. That's the revenue stream for the GMA, and it's also going to be the measure towards the progress of sustainability. Through that discussion, they concluded that ownership of the AMI, the advanced metering infrastructure under the grant, won't provide that confidence in the data. That alone won't do it. It needs to be tied with the meters. Over time, improvements in technology and given the useful life of the AMI being installed and the meters in the field, that conversation of ownership should continue, but with that broader horizon. So it's not for discussion today, but it should be continued. They requested that staff provide recommendations to the board on procuring the AMI and with the well owners owning the equipment, but with some, I have here incentives for early installation. It was actually a broader context than that. It was for an efficient way to get them procured and installed in the field so we can meet the requirements of the grant. So I have two options. One option is what we did under the original AMI ordinance, and that's a rebate where the well owners purchase the equipment, they pay the vendor for the equipment, they send a copy of the invoice to the GMA, and then we process it as a rebate. And it's a little problematic on the scale we're approaching with the grant, with 700 wells. The contractor installing them will be dealing with each grower, invoicing each one individually, having to respond to their orders, and won't have the economy of scale of attacking it as 700, one order of 700 units. And it'll be a lot more work for the GMA staff in processing all those rebates and ensuring and cutting all those checks. The second option, now this wasn't discussed at the Operations Committee, but through help of the Nature Conservancy, they thought of this one, where the agency would contract with a vendor for installation, agency-wide. That vendor would need a deposit, most likely, to purchase the equipment or supplies needed to build the 700 units. The contractor then will engage the well owners, actively pursue getting the orders and getting on-site to install them. They will invoice individually the well owners, but only for the amount above a discount price. So instead of a rebate, the price is discounted to the owners. And some situations require special equipment or extra cable, so the price isn't the same for every well. So the agency then would receive a single monthly bill from the contractor that bundles up all the installations and the total of the discounted prices that weren't paid by the growers. And so the agency then just pays one bill. On the incentives or ability to move quickly to get this done, option 2 is a little more effective on that front and in streamlining the process. Another incentive, and these details are still to be worked out, would be early adopters would receive a higher rebate or a higher discount, and that the later adopters would be really the ones funding that, because they would not get as high a discount and it would probably dwindle down to possibly zero until the grant runs out. The details here still need to discuss what those tiers would be, what the discounts will be. So our recommended action today is to provide direction on which option to choose, because then we can put it in our procurement documents, because we need to be sure we hire a contractor that can handle which way we go.
Robert, was there a report out of the Operations Committee that you wanted to?
So, as he said, the Operations Committee met on October 16th. Given what the major step is here that we're considering for the GMA. I'm surprised that the attendance and participation in it hasn't been greater, but there were certain key individuals from the certain stakeholders that did attend, and the feedback that we got from them would seem to imply that we would be looking at option number 2. There still is a lot of information that needs to be developed and put together in order to fully understand this and make sure we're not jumping ahead of ourselves, and the potential of a 2-year window for how long the grant runs gives us the opportunity in order to flush those details out. And if we can't put the program together in full detail with everything dotted and I, then we can certainly jump out of it and give everything to the wellhead owner, and we're out nothing.
So do I understand correctly, at least with respect to these two options? In option 1, the well owner would own the equipment. In option 2, it would remain the property of the agency until
No.
some time when a further decision is made?
No, our understanding is, and with our discussions with the Nature Conservancy, is that it would be owned by the well owner, and we are just paying a discounted price. They are paying the invoice for the equipment, and we're providing the discount
In option 1 or 2?
in both options.
Okay. Questions or comments from the board?
I had a question. I was hoping Matthew or Edgar was here. Someone asked John if he has any sense of, is this agreeable to the water market group, this option 2? Do you know?
So I don't know, John Crist, CEO, Farm Bureau. It's the first time I've heard this discussion about that. I'm not sure if Matthew or Edgar, both of whom are prepping for a big event tomorrow and couldn't be here. For us, I think in the water market context, the important thing is incentivizing people to install this equipment as early as possible, because without it, the market can't function. And in my view, or organization's view, the key issue is who owns the equipment. If you insist on agency ownership, it's going to be a disincentive for early adoption. People are going to have to be drag kicking and screaming into it. Under these, if I'm understanding correctly what you said, Arnie, under both these options, you've got a wellhead owner owning the equipment. So that addresses that issue. So I can't imagine an objection to the mechanism of how the payments are handled. That's not really pertinent.
Very good.
EJ?
E.J. Armstrong with the Nature Conservancy. Thank you for allowing me to speak. This option 2 was actually developed with Matthew and Edgar's input. It was not developed by the Nature Conservancy. It was developed for the 3 of us, and it works for all 3 of us. So.
And I was going to mention that about the last water market ad hoc, Matthew presented the option 2, and as well as the graduated incentive schedule that they've been considering. So, okay. Any other comments from the board?
From the board or to the board? I'm going to let Jared speak first.
Okay. Comments or questions from the public?
Good afternoon. Jared Bouchard, General Manager of Pleasant Valley County Water District. It's been some time since the GMA started this process and looking into it, and I was employed by somebody else and still have some of the same questions when I spoke to the GMA earlier on. I guess a couple of questions is, one, has the product vendor been selected already that the GMA is going to use? And that, I think for individual well owners, I don't think it poses as much of a problem. Certainly for PV, we'd like to understand if that vendor's been selected, if it's a vendor that we're comfortable with, as we operate a little differently than individual agricultural well owners. Secondarily, on the question of ownership, I hope that the discussion has gone farther, and I know Director Aranio, and working in the field, understands this. But one question that I have is, how is the GMA going to deal with going forward? When you put 700 AMI units out there, the initial installation is one question. the long-term maintenance of that device becomes an issue. And I can tell you from experience, and I'm just asking that we be forward-thinking in this so that we don't end up with the problem later, when that product fails, not everybody has a staff that knows how to fix that equipment or to come out and repair it. And are we setting aside money for that under this ownership program, or are we just going to launch it, hand these things over to people, and then there's going to be fines if they don't have it up and running, back and running in 30 days? What do you do when the device goes down? So those are just a few questions that I guess maybe would help me understand where the GMA is going. So vendor selection, implementation, and how we're going to manage it in the long term over and above installation. Thank you.
I can answer the question on vendor selection. I don't think any vendor has yet been selected. Throughout the initial pilot phase, Ranch Systems installed a number of meters, worked through a number of technological problems and redesigns in order to develop a unit that was functional for our purposes and reasonably bulletproof, so they say. But and so to that extent, they've already got their fingers in the pie. But in terms of any, no RFP has been done yet, no commitment has been made to anybody about who the vendor will be. Now, with respect to implementation, I'll have to ask Arnie to answer that for you.
Under the scenario where the growers own the equipment, they would be responsible for the equipment, similar as they own their meters now and they are responsible for maintaining their meters. This would be handled administratively through an ordinance requiring AMI on all meters, and how we defined all is up to the ordinance, and we have a draft of that we were working on through the operations committee.
Did the operations committee have a recommendation?
So actually, I've got several questions that thank you for giving me the time to think about them. There was a draft AMI performance specification that was presented to the committee for us to look at, and we are still, I think a couple corrections need to be done on that, but we're 90% ready on that specification as to what the AMI equipment would need to be in order for us to be able to go on out on that one. From what you've said and what I remember are two very different things. I was under the impression that we were still leaning towards a agency ownership, but there were some things that I needed to do a little homework on and get back together with you, and that's probably what our November 6th operations committee was going to be. The discussion definitely, on my behalf, was for ownership within the agency, and then you asked us also what is our long-term vision and where do we see this going, and we had stakeholder involvement there. So my impression was by the end of that operations committee, with the exception of one person in the audience, and I'll ask Carol to go ahead and put her views there, it was generally understood or believed that the agency would be going forward with ownership of the equipment with a longer-term goal of meter ownership on the wellhead too. And what you're bringing me today is two options that totally discount that and is not where the direction of this is going. So am I in some other kind of land?
Certainly we have some confusion there. I did not walk away from the meeting with that understanding.
Shit. Okay. Director Bennett?
He'll be back.
That's right.
Kim, you were there. What's your thoughts? Carol? Daryl? Martin? He's not here.
Carol Schoen, Zone Mutual Water Company. Yeah, it's amazing. We were all at the meeting. We all came away with something different. I don't agree with either one of those. What I came away with thinking was it would be a single vendor that will be chosen. My feeling is that it ought to be a list of accepted vendors and let the owner of the well choose who he goes through. It ought to be a protocol that is set up that the equipment has to look like this, act like this. Here's the data stream that must come to the GMA, and that's how we should start. The other part of it was, is it a rebate? And then the wellhead owner owns it. That was one of the options. The other one was, the way I understood it, that during the process of completing this grant for that 2-year period, the Nature Conservancy has ownership of the equipment. At the end of the grant, it goes to the wellhead owner. We did have a lot of other discussion about where the agency would like to go in the future and all with other equipment options and all, but that really wasn't the focus of what we were trying to get through at the meeting. So it's those two options that I came away with.
Let me just interject a question. No, not to you, Carol, but knowing the next item on the agenda and the timeline that we have, is there any reason we shouldn't return this to the Operations Committee so that it comes back at the November 8th meeting here with the full committee, hopefully, and either a consensus or a clear path? 13, you're right. November 13th.
I'm going to say I don't have an
You're
8th
right. No,
meeting
you're
on
right.
my calendar.
That's December 8th, November 13th. If the
Yes.
Operations Committee is meeting the 6th of November, any reason why this can't wait 2 weeks?
We can do that.
Just my, I don't know if any of the board has any other thoughts, but given that the last meeting seemed to end with something, not, with discordant views and no consensus or not even a common understanding of what the plans were, maybe we need to return it there so we get something more cohesive.
He'd like to tell what his thought was.
Okay.
We can do that. I'd like to I can clarify, I think, some of Carol's comments. The list of accepted vendors would be for equipment that's already installed, or if somebody chooses to buy their own. We don't want to replace that equipment through the grant. So the performance specifications outlined what would be acceptable under an agency ordinance. And so that's where the options for other products, other vendors would be. The path forward for the agency in procuring 700 of these and getting them installed would be most efficient through a single vendor.
I think it would be a huge task for one vendor to install 700 meters in the time allotted, but it might be like herding chickens to have a variety of vendors trying to do that with no controls.
And then to just button up the concern of the Nature Conservancy owning it or during the 2 years, the grant, which is the next item, does specify equipment purchased with the grant funds is owned by the Nature Conservancy during the term of the grant. Our discussions with the Nature Conservancy and the grant manager is that both these options, the equipment is technically being purchased by the growers, and so that is not the case. It's not directly purchased with the grant funds, so that it's purchased by the owners and owned by the owners.
Even under option 2?
Mm-hmm.
That was the discussion.
The way they presented it, we're washing our hands.
But if under option 2, the GMA is funding the acquisition of the units subject to subsequent installation, then isn't that being bought with grant funds?
The way they presented it wasn't, that it's just a discount that we're funding. So maybe some clarity with legal is needed there.
Okay. Thank you. Darrell, did you have any other public comments?
I guess. Darrell Smith, grower. I wasn't really going to get up and talk, but I guess Robert talked me into it. I was at that meeting, and it was. It's my understanding that there are a number of problems associated with this, besides cost, installation, maintenance, etc. If you leave the information to be helter-skelter between this farmer, that farmer, this farmer, that farmer, I think you're going to run into some inherent problems with farmers maintaining and holding the equipment to the standard that the agency would like to see. I have, and I think I discussed it, I have my own meter at great expense. And one of the reasons why I have the type of meter I have is because of the type of water I produce. It will not require, it will not accurately measure water because the sand eventually deteriorates it. And I'm not so sure that that would take place in something like this, but the environment probably would. And it seems to me that the main reason why this is happening is because we don't really trust the people that are reporting accurately, so we're going to take it out of their hands and have the control of understanding what's going on. And if that's the case, then you should have the information centralized. You know, I don't believe you want it helter-skelter here and there. So if you want to have it centralized, I think it's probably not going to be best to leave it in the hands of the individual farmer. And that's all I got to say about that.
Thank you.
Be nice today. Jeanette Lombardo, California Women for Ag. I think some of the reasons you may not be having the turnout at the Operations Committee meeting is there is some confusion out there. When this was first brought to us, as I stated this morning in the Las Posas Users Group meeting, many farmers are under the impression that they would only have this equipment installed if they were participating in the water market. So I think that has shifted and changed from the number of units that I'm hearing. I don't know if that information has been given to the farmers. I haven't seen it in any communication from any ag association in the county. So I'm just saying I think we need to work on our outreach. Because I agree, you should have the room filled if that is indeed the case.
Well, Jen, one of the things that we've discussed at these meetings is that on more than one occasion, even though the AMI component and the water market component are often discussed together, they're two separate items, and irrespective of what happens short-term or long-term with the water market, there's a need for the AMI component system-wide. And if that message isn't clear, then perhaps this explanation will make that clear. I think the discussions the board has had to date is that, assuming that it's feasible and that at some point the board will consider a system-wide adoption of an AMI program. Now, whether it's adopted or not, remains to be seen, but I think that's certainly something that the board wants to consider. And that's part of what this grant facilitates.
And I understand that, but I'm telling you, that is not the general impression out there. And I work with other counties just north of us, Santa Barbara County, and throughout the Central Valley. And when you have farmers who aren't reporting at all, and now we're ahead of the curve doing just what we've been doing, right? They wish they'd been doing what we've been doing, and now we're kicking it up a notch. I think you're going to have some pushback from some farmers unless you do some outreach. So,
thank you.
Chair, if I might just comment, I don't know if public comments are finished, but as a correction, or at least my understanding of agriculture's acceptance of AMI was not so much a factor of that it needs to be done, but more a factor of for us to have a water market and a viable alternative for trading water and living within perceived limitations of pumping, that majority of the farmers agreed AMI was the only way to level that playing field and make the water market happen. So I would disagree in the fact that the water market and AMI are inextricably linked in farmers' minds. Without the water market, they don't see the value of it.
So with respect to this item and giving direction to staff, any objection to proposing that they return it to the Operations Committee to come back again on November 13th?
No objection from me.
No objections.
Those are your instructions.
Thank you.
I do have a question, though, for you before we leave this topic. One of the other draft documents that we took a look at was a policy for the timing of smart meters. What is the length of time before that policy or that draft document is going to be available for full public output and for us to be able to vote on setting those dates in concrete as to when mechanical meters are going to be phased out and smart meters are going to be in place, and everybody, not just ag on this grant, but M&I and mutuals being with smart meters?
So that policy discussion was surrounded the AMI ordinance. And the AMI ordinance wouldn't be a standalone ordinance, but it would be integrated into the ordinance code of the agency, since it does touch on different issues that are in there, such as metering. We're hoping to go quickly with the AMI ordinance. It does not need to be parallel to the grant or the water market, because the AMI is really needed for the water market. The ordinance would broaden it to agency-wide. That document, we're working with council to get that into the form that is needed to be adopted by your board as a draft. Hopefully we'll have that ready in December.
Okay. So there potentially could be 2 more operations committees where that will be available for stakeholder input and for floating around before it's going to show up in our board packet here and before the full board for discussion.
At least, yeah.
Okay.
And it is a public document now, having already gone out to that committee.
But what we're hearing over and again is that until it shows up on this agenda, no one sees anything.
Okay.
Any other comments before we leave this subject?
Chair, I just was thinking that, my previous comment where I said at the end that farmers don't see value in AMI equipment without the water market is perhaps a little bit harsh and overstated. I think certainly a lot of farmers do find value in the equipment. And perhaps many have moved to the idea that, a uniform and consistent reporting standard is probably the best thing for the agency and for the area. But nevertheless, the equipment and the water market are inextricably linked in their minds. Thank you.
Let me move on then to item, is it number 3 on the agenda, the subaward agreement with the Nature Conservancy? Arnie, is that yours also?
It is. And we're off. So, 2 items here is, one is the subaward with the Nature Conservancy for the grant, and the other is to authorize using $451,000 from the designated surcharges account as matching funds for that.
541?
Oh, I'm sorry, 541,000. Going to give you a quick background of how we got here today, the tasks that are funded under the grant, and the timeline, which has been shifted since the original application for the grant assumed a May start date. Back in January is when we applied for the grant, and your board committed the $799,388 in matching, both in cash contribution and in-kind funds. The grant was announced in June. In September, the Nature Conservancy, who applied for the grant through NRCS, they entered into that grant agreement, and we received the draft grant agreement this month. The grant is for a water market, 3 phases of a water market. The first phase already concluded. Remember, when we applied for this grant, we had assumed a much earlier start date. The second phase of the pilot water market is to be expanded based on findings under the first phase, and then expanding into a full-scale implementation of a water market, which is not clearly defined in the agreement or in the scope of work, but it is just a growing iteration of the water market. It also funds AMI installation. This is where the majority of the funds go to. The cash from the grant is to purchase the AMI. The cash from the designated surcharges account is matching to purchase the AMI. And it funds approximately 670 wells, with the understanding that 30 wells were funded through the first water market pilot AMI ordinance, and that was the rebate for the participants then. The designated surcharges account it's in a lockbox. It's not used for routine operations of the agency. At the end of the first quarter of this fiscal year, it was $2,365,000 in there, and we're requesting $541,000. Two other components of the grant. One is for a data management system. This is just to get the requirements, the technical requirements and specifications needed for a data management system that can manage the water market, new allocation systems. It is not to have that built, but it's going to be a significant amount of staff time to get that written in the right language so that we can go out to get that done. And then finally, some project management and reporting under the grant. The final report will be written by the Nature Conservancy as they are the prime award. The timeline has been shifted since the later award, but it has compressed a little bit. You know, they didn't really move the back as fast as they moved the front in, but it goes to, we have here a March 2019 date. It is a 3-year grant. There is a possibility of more time at the end, but we are committed to sticking with this timeline in the grant. And as you can see, I'm not going to read them all out to you, but there's quite a bit of steps and tasks to accomplish under this effort. Committing to this grant does mean some future board actions of a Phase 2 water market ordinance. We need to renew the MOU with the exchange administrator. That's Cal Lutheran, who acted under the pilot. And at the end of the grant, when we go to a full-scale implementation of the water market, AMI installation, as we just discussed, would require an ordinance, the contract with the vendor to get it installed, and a data management contract. And this data management is separate from the one I just spoke of. This is strictly managing the data that is being communicated from the AMI devices so that the GMA, the exchange administrator, and the grower will all have access to that data at different levels. The GMA would only see it monthly, where the growers would be able to see their data in, I think, 15-minute increments.
Chair, could I ask a question? Arnie, back up on the data management. We heard two different kinds of data management. What's the difference?
This data management is specifically what is being communicated from the AMI devices. So it's the data from the meter, the pressure sensor, what's measuring the electricity usage. This data goes into a database that the water market exchange administrator needs to see to understand that if there's a trade taking place, that they actually have that water to trade. The other data management system is more for operations of the GMA, and it is just a grander scale of to incorporate, not just incorporate that AMI data, but to bring that monthly data into the GMA, so then we can track on our system extractions, that we can track the extractions and the allocations, or the trades to the allocations, to be sure that things are working on our end, and that for that.
So is data part one a revamping of the agency's database?
Yes.
Okay, that has now been that will be reconfigured to accept the electronic data coming in from the automatic meters. That's a much grander project than.
It is.
Okay.
It is, and that's why
I recall being quite irritated at the expense of the first data management effort we were involved in, and I'm getting visions of another effort of similar scale or higher.
Yes, and I will say it is needed. Our data management system, my understanding, is very good at collecting data, very poor at communicating that data back out in a useful information.
And is it thought about who will be doing that for us, developing that software?
developing the software.
It is a piece of
We-
software.
We have
isn't it?
had some discussions on our current one was done in-house with the county's IT. There could be an off-the-shelf version. We don't know. The reason we didn't put that in the grant is the grant required it to be open source software, and we didn't want to limit ourselves to that. Kim Loeb is much more familiar with the data management, if you'd like him to answer.
Sorry for getting off topic here, Chair, but I thought it was pertinent to.
Well, Director Borchard, Mr. Chair, Kim Loeb, agency staff. So the idea here is we know that we need to move into a new data management system. We've been talking about that for a while with new allocation systems. And what we put in here for this grant is we're going to have to develop, and we've started working on this, but we need to develop it in a much more detailed way. All the requirements that we have for what the system needs to do, then we will look at how we can procure the system that will do that. I think that it's well recognized that a custom-developed solution like we have now is not as nimble. It's a large capital investment up front. It's tougher to make changes to. And so I think that we're hoping that maybe there's actually a software as a service in the cloud that's something similar, that is close enough that can be customized on a subscription basis, or maybe there's an off-the-shelf software like Arnie was talking about that would be at least a good start that then could be customized to do what we need to do. But what we need to do first is really identify in a very specific way what the requirements are for the system to do, and then we can start looking and finding out what is out there that can accommodate that. But I do think that, at least from staff's perspective, that building a ground-up custom solution is probably the last or the lowest what am I trying to say? It's the least attractive option, I think. I think we're hoping that we can find something, and are fairly optimistic that we probably will be able to find something that's not a custom from the ground up system like we have now. So that was kind of a long-winded way of answering your question, but hopefully it gave you some background.
You basically answered the main question, is that that's going to be funded outside of this grant.
Yes, we'll become, once we develop the requirements and we're ready to move forward with investigating how to procure that system, that then we'll be coming back to your board and exploring that and moving forward with that outside of the grant. Yes.
And yet it seems really important that you kind of have that ready to go as the AMI data is coming together, so that, you know, there's not this lag time. You've got great equipment in the field and no way to read it.
Well, the AMI data reading will be, that's part of the AMI operation. Arnie can talk about that more. That will be, reading that, collecting those data is being done by the AMI vendor, but those data will then dump into our new database system. Until we have that, we'll have to be doing a little bit of hand maneuvering to keep that together.
It's the dump that you just referred to.
Right.
That I think is important.
Right.
That you be ready to accept it.
Absolutely, agreed.
And manipulate it.
And then I would also just.
And manipulate it.
Correct.
You have to get the reports you need. You can't just have a bunch of data.
Correct, Director Craven. We will certainly be ready to do that. Now, we may not have as elegant an automated solution out the door as we move forward with this, but we will certainly be prepared to handle the data and operate with it and keep the operations moving in a good, efficient way as we move into an even better process down the road.
I think I understand you, and I would just reiterate that I wouldn't like to see the agency then needing to hand enter data for 2 years because we haven't gotten together the agency database yet to accept it. So that it seems to me they ought to be kind of on parallel tracks.
Correct. I think that there won't be hand entering data because these data will come down in a electronic format. So we will be able to utilize those in their electronic format. There won't be hand entering of data.
And then I would just say that I support the effort of having a solid data management system. It's what we thought we were getting the first time we did it. So I would hope that this is actually the real thing this time.
Well, I can't speak to the history of that completely as I wasn't here, but I can say that we're in a much different place now than where that system was started and what was originally envisioned to do. So
Fair. That's a fair comment. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I have one. The grant is for 670 wells to be with AMI equipment in order to support their participation in the water market. Is that just agricultural wells, or would that be M&I also? And if M&I already has a SCADA system that meets the specifications that the GMA is going to be putting together, can we participate in the water market immediately?
First question, the grant was written for active agricultural wells. So that excludes M&I and excludes backup wells. The phase 2 of the water market, it's not ironed out yet, but the discussion on Friday was that it would include mutual water districts that were agricultural districts. So and ideally a water market would be as inclusive as possible. So when it broadens out in phase 3, municipal ag transfers should be a possibility.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public? Questions, comments? At this point, I guess the chair will entertain a motion to approve the subaward agreement with the Nature Conservancy for the grant.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Do we need a roll call?
Chair West?
Yes.
Director Aranio?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
We also need a motion then to authorize $541,000 of funding from the designated surcharges account to be used as matching funds for AMI installation.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
And the roll call?
Chair West?
Yes.
Director Aranio?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
All right, moving on then to item number 4 on the agenda is a review of a committee structure with respect to the annual work plan. Maybe.
Chair West, Board, Arnie Anselm, staff to the GMA. Seeing that it was a shorter agenda than usual here, I wanted to take the opportunity just to briefly get our heads up out of the weeds and look at the future and with respect of the work we have in front of us, but also the tools we have to accomplish those tasks. And in the concept of just increasing the opportunity for discussion, transparency, and definitely the stakeholder engagement. So I'm going to briefly go through the committee structure that's been designed by your board, and then speak to the tasks, some of the tasks ahead of us. So there's an executive committee with Director West and Directors Borchard. Focus of that committee is essentially the strategic planning and the prioritization of our work items. Fiscal Committee, Directors West and Craven. This committee works on budget development and tracking, and in fact, they review the budget and make a recommendation to this board to adopt the budget. I had in the original notes that it's also for the pursuit of grants or identification of grants that the agency staff should pursue. Operations Committee, Directors Bennett and Aranio, currently very focused on the AMI, advanced metering infrastructure, but also has on their in their purview there the performance of self-reporting, meter calibration, and software enhancements. And then we also have an ad hoc committee for the water market with Directors West and Bennett, excuse me, singularly focused on the water market. And I should also say the administration of the grant to be sure that we are meeting their expectations. Some of the future efforts that we'll be addressing, and we've had some of this discussion already today, is the funding and replenishment fees, identification of projects to get more water, and the regional coordination with other stakeholders and other agencies to make sure that these projects can happen. The allocation systems is going to be an ongoing effort. It's going to take quite a bit of work to get from an interim transition into the next allocation system that would work for everybody within the agency. And so these are some suggestions on how the committees can be used to address these issues in an ongoing, continual fashion, so that not just that progress is continually made, but also that stakeholders are brought along and understand where the agency is going. So a recommendation I have...
Arnie, would you back up one slide?
Certainly.
On allocation systems, the bottom one, storage project credit review, what is that?
I might need help from Kim on this one, but my understanding would be if somebody were storing water, would they get an allocation to pull that water back out?
Okay.
So I'm not asking you to commit to dates at this point on future meetings for all these subcommittees. I just want to put it out there that we could set, when we set our annual calendar, which we will be doing likely in December, to establish these meetings on an ongoing basis so that scheduling them doesn't become a scramble between meetings or when they are as needed. And that as with our alternate board meetings, they can be canceled if there's not work to be done.
There's one item that I can see that should be added to the executive committee for consideration and for dealing with. It's going to become, I think, more of a issue, and that would be enforcement. I can certainly see where staff would want to bring certain enforcement actions or challenges that they're seeing with implementation or as we go forward to the executive committee for consideration and direction as to how hard of a hammer do we come back down with.
Any other thoughts, questions, or comments from the board?
It certainly would be nice to have an idea, just for planning basis, having quarterly /monthly meetings set up. That we could, knowing ahead of time, we could kind of keep those days open. So that might facilitate advancing some of these items onto agendas and perhaps make us a little more efficient. So
I think it'd be a whole lot easier.
And looking at the list of tasks, I'm not so sure quarterly will do it.
One can be hopeful.
That's true.
Maybe they're just bigger meetings.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the public?
I understand, or I guess you were asking for direction from the board. Based upon what I saw, I like what you presented and go forward.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Get back to us with some date plans.
It'll be on the December agenda when the
Yes.
master calendar's developed. Is that right?
The last item we have on executives report, need a motion to receive and file.
So moved.
Second.
I have a question about it.
Okay.
Being that this is a request in order to waive fees of a rather sizable amount, I assume that this is something above ministerial and it will come back as a more agendized item for discussion or for questions that board members may have about it?
Yes, Director Aranio. This was a letter that was received. We've had some communication back and forth, and in fact, I think the City of Oxnard is going to withdraw this request, and they're going to rethink it a bit and maybe come back with a different proposal, but certainly that will be a regular agenda item whenever that they are ready to bring that to your board for consideration, not something that would be a consent item. This is just a correspondence received item on your agenda today.
Is there a threshold that, for surcharge wavering that would be considered ministerial versus what would come to the board, or do all surcharge waivers come to the board for review?
My understanding is that there has never been a waiver of a surcharge per se, but in 2 instances, your board has considered investment by the operator of what would have been the surcharge funds into a project that saved water. So that is what I think the city of Oxnard intends to propose, and that is a board decision. That's not a staff decision. The executive officer can consider a waiver or reduction of certain civil penalties that are assessed, but not surcharges. That's clearly only a board decision.
Is there a second to the motion? To receive and file the executive officer's report?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you very much. Didn't think my memory was that bad, but.